In the middle of the Pentagon, my father, a general, roared in front of his fellow officers. 7 languages? Utterly useless. The Army doesn't need soft bookworms. My brother stood beside him, a smirk on his face. They had no idea that this soft bookworm was about to become their worst nightmare. My name is Nellie Ford. I am 35 years old, a captain in the United States Army Military Police Corps, and on this particular Tuesday, I was a ghost. I sat in the 10th row, my Army service uniform feeling less like a symbol of pride and more like a suit of armor, its perfectly pressed fabric, the only thing holding me together. The auditorium inside the Pentagon was cavernous and solemn, steeped in the kind of institutional gravity that makes you feel small. Rows of decorated officers, a sea of dark blue and gold, filled the seats. But for me, the air wasn't reverent. It was thick and heavy, charged with the suffocating pressure that precedes a storm. From my seat, I could see them in the VIP section. My father, retired General Marcus Thorne, a living legend carved from granite and discipline. Beside him, my older brother, Major Mark Thorne, the Golden Sun, a West Point graduate destined to follow in our father's formidable footsteps. They were the stars of the Thorne family constellation, burning bright and hot. I was just a dim satellite, pulled into their orbit by the inescapable gravity of their name. My father hadn't looked at me once. He didn't need to. I could feel his presence like a physical weight on my shoulders, a silent, constant judgment. He was here as a celebrated guest, a testament to the Army's glorious past. Mark was here as its promising future, and I, Captain Ford, was here as a mandatory accessory, the final, slightly disappointing piece, required to complete the portrait of the perfect military family. Just breathe, I told myself, my gloved hands clenched tightly in my lap. Just get through this in silence, be invisible. It was a mantra I had perfected over a lifetime. The ceremony droned on. Medals were presented, speeches were made. I focused on a loose thread on the chair in front of me, anything to anchor myself. Then the master of ceremonies, a full-bird colonel with a polished voice, stepped to the podium. And now, he began, his voice echoing slightly, we wish to honor an officer whose unique contributions, though often silent, have had a resounding impact, for exceptional linguistic skills that have, on multiple occasions, saved American lives in hostile negotiations. I felt it before I saw it, a subtle shift in the atmosphere. Across the auditorium, I saw my father's shoulders stiffen. His back, always ramrod straight, became a plank of solid iron. And then the unthinkable happened. He stood up, not to applaud, not to leave. He stood up with the abrupt, commanding motion of a man who owned every room he entered. He stepped into the aisle, raising a hand not in a wave, but a command to halt. The colonel's voice faltered, then died. A wave of silence rippled through the vast hall. 1,000 conversations and coughs extinguished in an instant. My father's voice, the same battlefield roar that had directed battalions, thundered through the auditorium's state-of-the-art sound system. I have to say this, he boomed, his gaze sweeping over the rows of stunned faces. He wasn't speaking to the MC, he was addressing the entire United States Army. Linguistic skills, 7 languages, utterly useless. A collective gasp was sucked from the air. My blood ran cold. The Army needs warriors, he bellowed, jabbing a finger in the air for emphasis. Men who can pull a trigger, not some soft bookworms. Every head in that room turned. First, they looked from my father, this icon of military might, to the bewildered colonel on stage. Then their gazes began to skitter across the crowd, 1,000 pairs of eyes searching, curious, and then, like magnets snapping to steel, they all found me. The only officer in the room who fit that description. The general's daughter, the bookworm, my brother Mark, standing dutifully beside our father, did not intervene. He didn't look embarrassed. He simply watched the scene unfold, a smug, triumphant smirk pulling at the corner of his mouth. It was a look of pure victory. My world didn't just crack, it atomized. A high-pitched ringing filled my ears, blocking out the shocked whispers that had started to erupt. A hot, searing wave of shame washed over my face, my neck, my entire body. I was naked, flayed open in a room full of my peers, my superiors, my subordinates, and my own family held the knife. But just as the humiliation threatened to swallow me whole, another voice cut through the chaos. It was sharp, clear, and radiated an authority that didn't need to shout. General Thorne, General Shepard, the 4-star commander of USACIDC, had risen from his seat in the front row and was now striding towards the stage. He was a quiet, formidable man whose reputation was built on intellect, not volume. He fixed my father with a gaze as hard as diamond. Then his eyes found mine across the room. "Get Captain Ford up here," he commanded, his voice leaving no room for argument. "We need whisper." The silence that fell this time was different. It was heavier, deeper, laced with a profound and sudden respect. "Whisper?" I heard someone murmur from the row behind me. My legs felt like lead. My body, on some distant autopilot, began to move. I stood up. I put one foot in front of the other, and then a miracle. As I started my long walk down the aisle, a single officer in the 3rd row stood up, coming to sharp attention. Then another and another. In a silent, rolling wave, the entire room got to its feet. Lieutenants, captains, colonels, even the other generals in the VIP section. They all stood in rigid, silent salute. They weren't standing for my father. They were standing for me. I kept walking, my gaze locked on General Shepard. I walked right past my brother, whose smirk was now frozen on his face, a grotesque mask of disbelief. And then I walked past my father. He was still standing in the aisle, his body rigid, his face a ghastly, bloodless white. For the first time in my life, I saw not anger, not disappointment, but pure, unadulterated shock in his eyes. I didn't look away. I let that image burn itself into my memory as I walked toward the stage, toward the man who called me Whisper, leaving the wreckage of my family behind me. The storm had finally broken. That image of my father's face, ashen, defeated, stripped bare of its usual authority, should have been a victory. But as I stood on that stage, the respectful silence of the auditorium ringing in my ears, I felt no triumph. Instead, his shocked expression became a key, unlocking a door to a memory I had long kept bolted shut. The polished floor of the Pentagon dissolved, and suddenly I was 17 again, standing on the cold linoleum of our small house, on base at Fort Riley, Kansas. It was Thanksgiving. Our home, a standard-issue, wooden duplex assigned to Army families, was filled with the rich, comforting aromas of American tradition. The savory scent of a slow-roasting turkey, the sweet spice of my mother's pumpkin pie cooling on the counter. The air should have been warm, filled with laughter. But in the Thorne household, warmth was a rationed commodity. The air was cold, thin, and brittle with unspoken rules. All day, I had been clutching a secret, a thick, cream-colored envelope that felt like a ticket to another universe. It was my acceptance letter from Georgetown University, offering a full scholarship for their linguistics program. It wasn't just an acceptance, it was an escape. It was my dream, printed in elegant navy blue ink. I had hugged it to my chest, my heart thrumming with a nervous, hopeful energy, waiting for the perfect moment to share my triumph, to finally earn a sliver of the approval that was heaped so effortlessly upon my brother. That evening, our dining table was crowded with relatives, aunts and uncles in their Sunday best, all orbiting the gravitational center of our family, my father. He sat at the head of the table, a king presiding over his court, and next to him, the crown prince, my brother Mark, home for the holiday from his first year at West Point. He was the sun, and every conversation was a planet revolving around him. The stories were endless, of his grueling training, the respect he commanded from his peers, the glowing praise from his superior officers. He soaked it all in with a practiced, humble confidence that I knew was anything but. I sat silently, picking at my green bean casserole, feeling my own light dim until I was nothing more than a shadow at my own family's table. I was invisible. Finally, as the dessert plates were being passed, I saw my chance. My hands trembled slightly as I pulled the envelope from the pocket of my dress. My voice was small, barely a whisper. "Dad, I have something." I slid the letter across the polished wood of the table. He picked it up, his eyes glancing at the prestigious Georgetown logo without a flicker of interest. Then he set it down, not in a clear space, but next to the greasy carcass of the turkey, a place reserved for discarded bones and crumpled napkins. He didn't even open it. He looked at me, his gaze flat and unimpressed. Then his eyes shifted to Mark, and a familiar pride softened his features. He raised his voice, ensuring everyone at the table could hear his verdict. "A linguistics scholarship." He said the words as if they were a diagnosis of a disappointing illness. "More books. Nellie, look at your brother." He gestured toward Mark with his fork. "He's learning how to command a company of men. That is the future. That is strength. What are you going to do with a piece of paper like that? Translate for tourists while your brother is defending our country." The chattering around the table ceased. A thick, uncomfortable silence fell. I could feel my cheeks burn with a heat so intense it brought tears to my eyes. It felt as if 1,000 tiny needles were pricking my skin as I felt the pitying stares of my aunts and uncles. They looked away, suddenly fascinated by their empty plates. Across the table, Mark just shrugged, a perfect pantomime of indifference. But I saw it, a glint of cruel satisfaction in his eyes. He had won again. The final killing blow came with the dessert. My father stood, raising his glass of wine. "Everyone," he announced, his voice once again booming with pride. "A toast to Cadet Mark Thorne, the pride and the future of the Thorne family." A chorus of "Hear, hear," and "To Mark" echoed through the room. Glasses clinked together in a cheerful, ringing celebration of my brother's glory. No one mentioned my name. No one glanced my way. My achievement, my dream, was left to die on the table. My letter, the most important piece of paper in my young life, lay forgotten. A single bloody smear of cranberry sauce, now staining the corner of the envelope like a wound. That night, I cried in my room, the silent, heaving sobs of someone who has finally understood their place in the world. I clutched the one thing that felt like a shield, a heavy, worn French dictionary my mother had given me before she passed away. She was a scholar, a lover of words and history, a gentle soul in a house built on military steel. She was the one who had planted the love of language in me, who taught me that words had power, that understanding was a bridge. She used to tell me, "Nellie, your mind is a weapon. Don't ever let anyone tell you otherwise." But as I sat there, the tears soaking the thin pages of her gift, I realized that in this house, under this roof, my weapon was only a burden. It didn't make me strong. It made me a target. It didn't make me valued. It made me a disappointment. And a question, cold and sharp, pierced through my grief. Why? Why did I keep fighting for the approval of a man who would never give it? Why did I keep trying to win a game that was rigged from the very beginning? That question, born from the tears of a 17-year-old girl, became the engine of my new life. Why play a rigged game? The answer was simple. You don't. You walk away from the table and build your own. After graduating from Georgetown, I didn't go home. I went straight into the Army, choosing the Military Police Corps, a path I knew my father secretly disdained for a woman. It was my own quiet rebellion. My first duty station was Fort Drum, New York. The winters there are a special kind of brutal. It's not just the heavy lake effect snow that buries everything in a blanket of oppressive white. It's the wind. A relentless, biting wind that sweeps down from Canada and seems to find every crack in your clothing, every sliver of exposed skin. But even that profound physical cold was nothing compared to the icy reception I received from my colleagues. I was the only female MP officer in my unit, and the only one with a degree in something other than criminal justice. I was an anomaly, and they never let me forget it. They called me Georgetown, a nickname that dripped with sarcasm, or even worse, the dictionary. In our daily briefings, I would try to offer analysis on how cultural nuances or local dialects might impact a mission, only to be met with dismissive shrugs or outright interruptions. My commanding officer, a captain of the old school who believed muscles solved every problem, once told me point blank, "Ford, I need MPs who can kick down a door, not ones who can analyze Farsi poetry." My assignments reflected their opinion of my skills. I was relegated to the most tedious tasks, primarily translating stacks of mundane documents, a job everyone believed a machine could do better. I was isolated, my expertise treated not as an asset, but as a bizarre and useless hobby. The loneliness was a physical presence, a constant companion in the gray, frozen landscape. But I refused to break. The girl who cried over a stained envelope was gone. In her place was a woman forged in quiet fire. I took their disdain and turned it into fuel. I didn't complain, I worked. I showed up earlier than everyone and stayed later. I spent hours in a small windowless room, listening to interrogation tapes over and over, not just for the words, but for the hesitations, the shifts in tone, the subtle grammatical tells that signaled deception. I used my own money to buy books on criminal psychology and nonverbal communication, building a library they would never read. I created my own system, a unique matrix that blended linguistics, cultural anthropology, and psychology to build profiles of our subjects. It was a weapon no one else had, and I sharpened it in silence. At night, alone in my sterile barracks room, the wind howling outside my window, I found solace in a different kind of voice. I read the works of Maya Angelou, her words a balm for the day's small cuts. Her poem, Still I Rise, became my silent creed. I would recite it to myself in the dark. You may shoot me with your words, you may cut me with your eyes, you may kill me with your hatefulness, but still, like air, I'll rise. I didn't need their validation, I just needed to prove them wrong. My chance came in the form of a dead-end case, An internal arms smuggling ring had been operating on the base for months, and the investigation had stalled completely. They had a prime suspect in custody, a civilian contractor, but he refused to talk. After weeks of getting nowhere, they were forced to turn to me as a last resort. The problem? The suspect spoke only a rare dialect of Pashtun, common in a remote valley of Afghanistan. They led me to the interrogation room, the air thick with stale coffee and failure. Inside, the man sat sullen and defiant. I didn't use threats. I didn't raise my voice. I simply sat down and began to speak to him in his own tongue. I didn't ask about weapons. I asked about his home. I spoke of the poets from his region, of the ancient folk tales his mother might have told him. I saw a flicker of surprise in his eyes, then a deep, profound sadness. I recognized it instantly, the bone-deep ache of homesickness, of being a world away from everything you know. I had built a bridge to him, not with pressure, but with understanding. 2 hours later, he had confessed to everything, mapping out the entire smuggling network. When I walked out of the interrogation room, holding the signed confession, the entire office fell silent. The usual clatter of keyboards and ringing phones ceased. My captain, the man who wanted door kickers, looked up at me from his desk. He said nothing, but for the first time, the dismissive smirk was gone. In its place was a look of grudging respect. It wasn't a medal, it wasn't a public commendation, but it was my first victory. A small, silent win on a long, lonely road. That silent victory at Fort Drum opened a door I never knew existed. My success in the Pashtun case meant my methods, once dismissed as eccentric, were now a subject of official interest. I was summoned to a high-level briefing with Erkiber, the Army's cyber command, to report on my process. The briefing room at Fort Meade was another world entirely. Gone was the rugged, practical grit of Fort Drum, replaced by the sterile, constant hum of servers processing the nation's secrets. The air was cold, smelling of chilled, filtered air and hot electronics. It was filled with sharp-eyed tech specialists, men and women who lived in a world of signals intelligence, of firewalls and encrypted data streams. I, with my focus on the unpredictable, messy nuances of human behavior, felt like a historian in a room full of physicists, an analog expert in a digital fortress. I delivered my presentation, my voice steady as I walked them through my methodology, the cultural mapping, the analysis of paralinguistic cues, the psychological profiling based on word choice. When I finished, the response was a wave of polite, professional nods. They understood the outcome, the what, but the process, the how, remained a foreign abstraction. They saw the data point, but not the person behind it. As the room began to clear out, a quiet shuffling of chairs and murmured conversations filling the space, one person stayed behind. He was a Warrant Officer 3, with a calm, steady presence that stood out in the room's high-strung energy. He waited patiently, not looking at his phone or packing a briefcase, just waiting until we were the only two left. "Captain Ford," he began, his voice calm and deep, a stark contrast to the boisterous tones I was used to. "Elias Vance, but everyone calls me Eli." He didn't offer a handshake, just a small, respectful nod. He wasn't looking at the results on my final slide. He was looking directly at me. "I have a question about your process. You mentioned you identified the suspect's primary deception based on his reversal of sentence structure when discussing logistics. That's not in any field manual. That's art." I was stunned into silence. For years, my work had been judged solely on its product, a confession, a piece of intel. It was a binary world of success or failure. But this man, this stranger, wasn't just seeing what I did. He understood how I did it. He saw the craft, the delicate, intuitive dance behind the science. For the first time, I felt not just successful, but truly seen. "Thank you, warrant officer," I managed, my voice a little hoarse. "Eli," he corrected gently. "Would you have time for a coffee, Captain? I'd like to hear more about your art." We ended up at a small, off-base diner, the kind of place with worn red vinyl booths, the faint smell of bacon in the air, and a waitress who called everyone Hun. Over mugs of steaming black coffee, we talked for hours. It was effortless, a conversation that flowed like water. I found myself telling him things I hadn't spoken of in years. About my mother's old books, about how she taught me that every language was a unique key to a different way of seeing the world, a different way of feeling. He, in turn, spoke of the beauty he found in his own world. He described the elegance of clean code, comparing it to poetry where every line has a purpose, nothing wasted. He explained how he could identify a hacker's voice just by the patterns they used, the unique signature they left behind in the digital architecture. "A sloppy coder leaves messy footprints," he explained, his eyes lighting up with passion. "An arrogant one uses unnecessarily complex structures to show off. A paranoid one builds layers of misdirection. It's all there. You just have to know how to listen." "Our worlds are more similar than I thought, Eli," I said, a small, genuine smile forming on my face. "You decode machines, I decode people. We're both just looking for the truth hidden beneath the surface." In that moment, a connection sparked, a sense of kinship I had never once felt with my own brother. With Eli, I wasn't the odd dictionary girl. I wasn't a disappointment. I was a respected peer, an expert in my field. And he was the first person to make me feel that way. A few days later, an email from him appeared in my inbox. There was no long message, just a single link to a Brené Brown TED Talk on the power of vulnerability. Below the link, he had typed one short sentence. "Courage isn't about not feeling afraid. Courage is about feeling afraid and stepping into the arena anyway." He saw it all. He saw the resilient armor I wore every day, but he also saw the fear I hid beneath it. He understood the silent, exhausting battle I fought. That Saturday, I was buried under translations in my office, the fluorescent lights humming into the late hours, casting a sterile glow on the piles of paper. The loneliness in those moments was a palpable thing, a weight in the quiet room. Around 9 p.m., the door opened. It was Eli, holding a large pepperoni pizza box and a cold can of Coke. "Thought you might need this," was all he said. He didn't offer advice or try to fix my problems. He simply pulled up a chair, opened his own laptop, and sat with me in the quiet hum of the office, a silent partner in the late-night grind. His presence was a profound statement that spoke louder than any words. You are not alone. It was then I truly understood. Family isn't always about the blood you share. Sometimes it's about the people who show up when you're broken. It's the one who sees your scars and doesn't run away. It's the one that brings you pizza on a lonely Saturday night and helps you piece yourself back together, one slice at a time. Have you ever felt that? That moment of grace when a stranger, a friend, shows you more kindness and understanding than you've ever known from your own blood? That was Eli. He was the first member of a family I was finally, consciously choosing for myself. The years that followed my time at Fort Drum were a quiet blur of progress. My friendship with Eli became my anchor. We were stationed on different continents half the time, but our bond forged over coffee and code, only deepened. Professionally, my reputation grew. I was no longer the dictionary girl, but a respected specialist. My work eventually took me to Camp Eagle, Bosnia, a sprawling American base set against the green war-scarred hills. I was mediating a series of delicate peace negotiations between rival local factions, a job that required every ounce of my skill and focus. It was demanding, fulfilling work. I had built a life for myself, a world away from the shadow of my family. Then, one evening in early December, just as the first Christmas decorations were starting to appear around the base, my satellite phone rang. The caller ID flashed a number I hadn't seen in years. General Marcus Thorne. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. He had never, not once, called me while I was on deployment. A foolish, stubborn flicker of hope ignited in my chest, a hope I thought I had extinguished long ago. Maybe he heard about my work here, the thought whispered. Maybe he's proud. Maybe, after all this time, he wants to apologize. I took a deep breath and answered. Hello, Nellie. His voice was the same, a baritone of pure, undiluted authority that instantly transported me back to my childhood. Your brother and I are here. We have something important to discuss with you. Then another voice, slick and smooth, oozing a synthetic warmth that made my skin crawl. Hey, little sister, Mark said. Heard you're doing big things out there. I almost believed them. For a moment, I let the hope burn brighter. My hope was a candle, and they snuffed it out with a single breath. My father dispensed with the pleasantries immediately. You're working with a private military contractor out there, Aegis Logistics, correct? Yes, I answered cautiously. They provide some of our comms and logistical support. Good, he said. I have a solid relationship with their CEO, a good man. It seems there's a CID investigation coming down the pipeline, some allegations about their equipment not meeting standards. I felt a cold knot forming in my stomach. I knew where this was going. I need you to influence the report, Nellie, he continued, his tone matter-of-fact, as if he were asking me to pass the salt. Just soften it, omit a few of the more damaging technical details, emphasize the positive operational record. Consider it a favor for the family. I was speechless. The audacity of it stole the air from my lungs. He wasn't just asking me to lie, he was asking me to commit a felony, to betray my oath, my unit, and the very core of my duty as an officer, all to protect one of his business connections. Dad, I stammered, my voice barely audible. That's illegal. It's a violation of the Uniform Code of Military Justice. It's an ethical breach. The warmth, fake as it was, vanished from his voice, replaced by a familiar, chilling cold. Don't you dare lecture me about ethics, Nellie, he snapped. I served this country for 40 years. You're just a captain. This is how the world works. You help us, we help you. Don't forget who gave you that name on your uniform. It was a threat, wrapped in the guise of a reminder. Then Mark chimed in, his voice dripping with condescending pity. That's right, Nellie, don't be naive. This is your chance to finally prove you can be useful to this family. A real team player. And there it was. The truth, stripped bare. In their eyes, I wasn't an officer. I wasn't a specialist with a valuable skill set. I was a tool, a pawn on their chessboard to be moved and sacrificed for their own gain. The years of work, the small victories, the life I had painstakingly built for myself, it all meant nothing to them. I was still just the disappointing daughter, finally being offered a chance to be useful. A surge of anger, hot and pure, rose within me. It wasn't the helpless rage of my youth. It was the clear, focused fury of a woman who finally knew her own worth. The lessons from Eli, the strength I'd found in my own solitude, the self-respect I had fought so hard to earn, it all coalesced into a single, unshakable wall of resolve. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I let the silence hang in the air for a moment, letting them feel the weight of my decision. Then I spoke one sentence, my voice low, clear, and steady. I will not. Before either of them could respond, I ended the call. My hand was trembling as I set the phone down, but inside, in the core of my being, something had settled. A line had been drawn. A door had been slammed shut, and this time I was the one who had turned the key. The line went dead, but the silence that followed was louder than any argument. I had defied him. For the first time in my life, I had not bent, not broken, not tried to placate him. I had simply said no. The finality of it hung in the cold Bosnian air. I knew there would be consequences. I just didn't know they would come so soon, or be so brutal. 3 days later, I was leading the final reconciliation meeting between the two local faction leaders. We were in a designated safe house on the outskirts of a small village, a drab concrete building chosen for its anonymity. The tension in the room was thick enough to taste. My team and I were on high alert. The comms system, provided by Aegis Logistics, had been glitchy all morning, crackling with static. Suddenly, a voice cut through the static on my earpiece. It wasn't my men. It was a strange voice, speaking Serbian with a chillingly calm demeanor. But the words weren't about the meeting. They were for me. Mala Shaptachicha, the voice whispered, little whisperer. Jeli tvoj otak razočaran u tebi? Is your father disappointed in you? Ice flooded my veins. It wasn't just my code name, Whisper, a name known only to a select few. It was the question, a surgical strike into the deepest, most private wound of my soul. A vulnerability known only to my family. It was a psychological blow, a message sent with cruel precision. Before I could even process the violation, the world exploded. The windows shattered inward, a shower of glass and splintered wood. The deafening roar of automatic gunfire erupted from all sides. The air filled with smoke, screams, and the smell of cordite. We were ambushed. My training took over. "Get down, return fire," I yelled, pulling the two faction leaders to the floor as my soldiers scrambled for cover. It was chaos. My team fought with disciplined bravery, but we were outgunned, pinned down in a perfectly executed kill box. A bullet ripped through the air, searing a hot line of pain across my shoulder as it tore through my uniform and skin. Warm blood streamed down my arm. Through the haze of smoke and gunfire, a horrifying clarity pierced through my fear. This wasn't a random attack by a disgruntled faction. This was a professional hit. They knew our exact location. They knew our meeting time. They even knew my deepest psychological weakness. Someone had given them everything. Someone had sold us out. And in my heart, I knew who. The firefight felt like an eternity. When the rescue helicopters finally arrived, their thumping blades scattering the smoke and driving the attackers back into the woods, all I could think of were two images: my father's cold, commanding face and my brother's smug, triumphant smirk. This was their answer to my defiance. They hadn't just disowned me. They had tried to erase me. Back at Camp Eagle, the medics patched up the gash on my shoulder. The physical wound was clean, manageable, but it was nothing compared to the wound in my soul. They tried to kill me, my own family, to protect a business deal, to maintain a relationship, to punish my insubordination. The official report was a masterpiece of bureaucratic fiction. The incident was classified as a protocol failure, a tragic consequence of meeting in a compromised location. As a result, I was being reassigned for my own safety. It was a lie. I was being exiled, sent to a desk job at Fort Belvoir, Virginia, where I could be silenced and forgotten. That night, in my temporary quarters, I stood before a small mirror. I looked at the reflection staring back, a tired woman, her face pale with shock, a fresh bandage stark against her uniform. But her eyes were not defeated, they were burning. The simmering anger I had suppressed for a lifetime had finally erupted, forged in the crucible of betrayal and fire into a single, cold, hard purpose. Have you ever been pushed so far, betrayed so deeply, that all the fear inside you burns away and leaves nothing but pure, unyielding resolve? That was me in that moment. I placed my hand over my heart, over the uniform they had tried to turn into my shroud, and I whispered the words of my oath, the sacred promise I had made to my country, but now remade for myself. I, Nellie Ford, will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. My voice was a low, steady whisper, but it was the most powerful sound in the world. And I knew with absolute certainty that my enemy was no longer a distant threat in a foreign land. My enemy was domestic. My enemy shared my blood. The real war had just begun. My exile to Fort Belvoir, Virginia, was meant to be a quiet professional death. They gave me a gray, soulless cubicle in a sprawling administrative building, a mountain of mind-numbing paperwork, and expected me to fade away. They underestimated me. I didn't see a prison, I saw a command center. I didn't waste a single second on self-pity. The fire of my oath burned too brightly for that. My first and only call was to Eli. Using a secure, encrypted line, I reached him at his post in Germany. "Eli, it's Nellie," I said, my voice low and urgent. "I need your help. It's off the books, and it's dangerous." I told him everything. The phone call from my father and brother, the demand to falsify a report, my refusal, and the perfectly executed ambush that followed just 3 days later. I laid it all out, the cold, ugly facts. A long, heavy silence stretched across the line, and for a terrifying moment, I feared I had asked too much, that I had dragged my only friend into a mess too vast and too treacherous. Then he spoke, his voice a low, steady anchor in my storm. "Nellie," he said, and I could hear the steel in his tone. "I don't care if it's a 4-star general or the president himself. No one gets to do that to an American soldier. No one." He paused, then added, "Send me everything you have. We're going to burn their system to the ground." His loyalty was the only light in my darkness. It was all I needed. We began our war in the shadows. I started with the grammar of the system, just as my old Georgetown professor had taught me. "Liars always leave grammatical errors in their narrative," he used to say. "A flawed structure, a misused word, an unnatural rhythm. Truth has a natural syntax. Deception doesn't." My battlefield was hundreds of pages of Aegis Logistics equipment performance reports. On the surface, they were perfect, too perfect. The language was a sterile collection of corporate jargon and vague, positive-sounding terms. Operational efficacy, robust performance, minor logistical variances. It was all designed to say nothing while sounding impressive. I cross-referenced every report with maintenance logs, finding dozens of tiny, concealed grammatical errors, equipment failures logged as user error, damaged parts listed as scheduled for routine replacement. Meanwhile, thousands of miles away, Eli launched his own assault. He began a deep dive into the archived communication servers from the Bosnia mission. As he suspected, the official record was a lie. The log files from the night of the ambush were flagged as corrupted due to a system error. It was a clumsy, obvious attempt at a cover-up, but Eli was a digital ghost, a genius who moved through firewalls and data logs with an artist's grace. He told me later that a cover-up like that is like trying to hide a hole in the snow. You can't. The absence of data is itself data. He didn't look at the corrupted files, he looked at the space around them. He analyzed the server's backup caches and residual data fragments, and there in the digital dust he found it, metadata fragments that pointed to an unauthorized access port, opened and closed just hours before the attack. The port was traced back to a private, encrypted server, a server owned by Aegis Logistics. We worked relentlessly for 2 weeks, fueled by black coffee and a shared cold fury. We barely slept, communicating through encrypted chats at all hours. Then, at 3 o'clock in the morning, my phone buzzed. It was Eli. His voice was a mixture of exhilaration and pure rage. "I got it, Nellie. I got the son of a bitch." He sent me a single, heavily encrypted audio file. My heart pounded as I decrypted it. It was a restored recording from the Aegis server. It was a phone call between the CEO of Aegis and my brother, Major Mark Thorne. The call had taken place just 4 hours before I walked into that safe house. I pressed play, and my brother's voice filled the silence of my small room. "My father has done his part," Mark was saying, his voice smooth and confident. "The pressure is on. Now it's your turn. Just make sure the incident is convincing enough to shut her up permanently." The CEO murmured something about risk. "It's not a risk," Mark cut in coldly. "It's a solution." My breath hitched, my world tilted on its axis. But there was more. Eli had found another file. It was a digital copy of a contract addendum, approving a massive, no-oversight budget increase for Aegis Logistics. The authorization was dated the day after the ambush. The digital signature at the bottom was undeniable: General Marcus Thorne. I leaned back in my chair, the evidence glowing on my screen. The phone call, the signature. It was the truth, cold, sharp, and brutal. It was the confirmation of a betrayal so profound it defied comprehension. My professor was right. They had left their grammatical errors, and I had found every single one. My weapon was loaded. With the evidence in my possession, my weapon was loaded. But a weapon is useless without the right battlefield. Going through the standard channels, filing a report with the Inspector General, would have buried the truth under months, possibly years, of bureaucratic red tape. My father and his powerful friends would have suffocated it in the cradle. I needed a different kind of strategy. I needed a stage. So I made my final move. I compiled the most damning pieces of evidence, the audio file of Mark's call, the digital signature of my father's, the network logs from Eli's investigation, into a single, heavily encrypted summary. I didn't send it to the investigators. I sent it directly to the one man I knew valued honor above allegiance, General Shepard. The file was attached to a message with a single line: "General, the honor of the Army is at risk." For 3 agonizing days, there was nothing but silence. I started to fear I had miscalculated, that I had overplayed my hand. Then a short, formal order arrived in my inbox. "Captain Ford, you are required to attend the annual awards ceremony at the Pentagon." No explanation, none was needed. I understood immediately. General Shepard wasn't just acknowledging my message. He was setting the stage. The ceremony, an event where my father was scheduled to receive a Lifetime Achievement Award, was not going to be his coronation. It was going to be his tribunal. And I was to be the star witness. I returned to the same auditorium that had been the theater of my greatest humiliation. The air was thick with the same sense of pomp and circumstance, the same sea of dark blue uniforms and polished brass. But this time I felt no anxiety. The girl who had wanted to be invisible was gone. In her place was a woman who was about to become unforgettable. I walked to my assigned seat, my back straight, my gaze level. I felt a profound, chilling calm. I was the quiet eye of a hurricane I had created. From my seat, I could see them in the VIP section, my father looking regal and proud, accepting handshakes and congratulations. My brother Mark beside him, beaming, soaking in the reflected glory. They were utterly oblivious, confident in their power, never imagining that the pawn they had sacrificed was about to checkmate the kings. The ceremony began, speeches were made, awards were given. Finally, the moment came. The announcer called my father's name, listing his legendary accomplishments. He walked to the stage to a thunderous standing ovation. After he accepted his award, General Shepard, as the highest-ranking officer present, stepped to the podium to give the closing remarks. He began by praising my father's long career. Then his tone shifted. "Before we conclude," he said, his voice ringing with quiet authority, "there is one more matter of honor to address, an issue of security and integrity that touches us all." A nervous murmur rippled through the crowd. General Shepard gestured to the massive presentation screen behind him. There was a recent security breach in Bosnia that resulted in the compromise of a sensitive mission and injury to a U.S. Army captain. On the screen, a network diagram appeared, the one Eli had painstakingly reconstructed. It showed a clear, undeniable, unauthorized access port originating from an Aegis logistics server. "This breach was deliberately covered up," Shepard continued, his voice like ice. The screen changed, displaying the contract addendum. And this cover-up was authorized to protect a lucrative contract. He zoomed in on the signature at the bottom of the page, General Marcus Thorne. A collective gasp swept the room. My father's face, projected onto the screen by a nearby camera, turned a ghastly shade of white. The confident smile vanished, replaced by a mask of pure shock. But Shepard wasn't finished. He gave a subtle nod to the tech booth. And now the reason for the cover-up. A sound filled the auditorium, an audio file. It was my brother's voice, cold and clear, echoing through the silent hall. "My father has done his part. Now it's your turn. Just make sure the incident is convincing enough to shut her up. Permanently." The recording ended. The silence that followed was absolute, a crushing void. Every single person in that room, 1,000 pairs of eyes, turned away from the screen and stared directly at my father and brother, who were frozen in their seats like statues in a nightmare. I stood up from my seat and walked to the stage, just as I had been instructed. I stood beside General Shepard and looked down at my family. I saw my brother Mark, his face contorted in panic, trying to stand, to speak, to form a denial that would never come. 2 uniformed military police officers materialized beside him as if from thin air, their presence quiet, professional, and final. Then I looked at my father. I met his eyes across the stage. And for the first time in my 35 years, I did not see anger. I did not see disappointment or disdain. I saw fear, the raw, naked terror of a king who has been dethroned. of a powerful man who has been utterly and completely exposed. General Shepherd did not say another word. He simply turned to me and gave a slow, deliberate nod. It was a gesture of profound respect, a silent acknowledgement of a battle fought and won. He had given me justice. I returned the nod, a silent thank you. Then I turned and walked away from the podium, my steps steady and sure. I walked past the chaos, past the shocked whispers, past the ruins of the House of Thorn. I did not look back. I didn't need to. The storm was finally over. The storm had passed, leaving behind a strange, hollow silence. The days following the ceremony at the Pentagon were a blur of official proceedings. I gave my formal testimony to the investigators from the Inspector General's office, a calm, factual recounting of events. The evidence Eli and I had gathered was irrefutable. The system, once it was pointed in the right direction by a man with the integrity of General Shepherd, began to move with grim efficiency. The aftershock of my actions rippled through the military community. The name Thorn, once a synonym for honor and legacy, was now whispered with shame and disbelief. I felt a profound sense of relief, the feeling of a crushing weight being lifted from my soul. But underneath it, there was a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. The war was over, but the battlefield was my own life, and the casualties were my own family. I had one final encounter with my brother. As I was leaving the investigator's office, I saw him being escorted down the hallway by two stone-faced military police officers. He was in handcuffs, his uniform stripped of its insignia. When he saw me, his face, already pale with fear, contorted into a mask of pure venomous rage. "Are you happy now, Nellie?" he snarled, his voice a low, guttural growl. The MPs tightened their grip on his arms. "You destroyed this family, all of it. It was always you, wasn't it? Just a jealous, selfish little bitch who couldn't stand to see me succeed." His words, which once would have pierced me to the core, now felt like stones thrown against a fortress wall. They bounced off, powerless. I looked at him, at the man who was my brother, and felt nothing but a cold, empty pity. "No, Mark," I said, my voice calm and even. "I didn't destroy our family. I just told the truth. You and Dad destroyed it all by yourselves." I turned and walked away, not looking back, his furious, impotent shouts fading behind me. My father was not arrested immediately. His rank and decades of service afforded him a level of procedural courtesy. But his career was over. His reputation was shattered. His legacy was ashes. He requested to see me. I agreed to one last meeting, not for him, but for me. We met at a quiet coffee shop in Arlington, a place with wide windows that looked out onto a gray, overcast sky. He looked old. The ironclad authority had crumbled, leaving behind a stooped, tired man who seemed to have aged a decade in a matter of days. He sat stirring a cup of black coffee, his hands trembling slightly. He didn't apologize. He didn't admit fault. He didn't even meet my eyes for long. Instead, he slid a small black velvet box across the table. "Nellie," he said, his voice raspy, broken. "This is my West Point ring. I want you to have it." He finally looked up, his eyes pleading. Let's forget all this. We're still family, after all." It was his last move on the chessboard, a final, desperate attempt at manipulation. He was offering me the ultimate symbol of the legacy he had always denied me, a bribe to buy my silence, my forgiveness. He still didn't understand. He thought the prize I had always wanted was his approval, his world, his ring. He never realized that all I had ever wanted was a father. I gently pushed the box back across the table toward him. "I don't need it, General," I said, and the formal title felt both strange and liberating on my tongue. It was the final boundary, a wall I was building brick by brick. Honor isn't in a piece of gold, it's in our actions. And your actions and Mark's, they almost got me killed. I stood up from the table, my chair making a soft scraping sound on the floor. The few patrons in the cafe didn't look up. "I hope one day you understand that," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "But I can't wait for that day. From now on, I'm living my own life. I wish you luck, sir." I turned and walked out of the coffee shop, out into the cold air, and I did not look back. A wave of relief washed over me, so potent it almost brought me to my knees. But it was followed by a sharp, aching pang of grief. The phantom limb of a family that was no longer there. I had lost a father and a brother. I had lost the family I was born into. But as I walked down the street, feeling the cold Virginia air on my face, I knew with a certainty that settled deep in my bones that I had finally, truly, found myself. The aftermath of my war was quiet. After the tribunals, the dishonorable discharges, and the prison sentences, a deep silence fell over the house of Thorn. My father's name was stripped from buildings, his portraits removed from halls of honor. His legacy, the thing he had sacrificed his own daughter for, had turned to dust. I felt no joy in it, only a profound and quiet sense of peace. The heavy chains of expectation and disappointment that had bound me my entire life had finally rusted through and fallen away. I was free. I chose to leave the high-stakes world of field operations behind. On the advice of General Shepard, I accepted a teaching position at the U.S. Army Military Police School at Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri. It was a world of rolling green hills and earnest young soldiers, a world away from the sharp edges of Washington, D.C. and the ghosts of Bosnia. I was tasked with designing and leading a new program, Strategic Intercultural Engagement. My own little corner of the Army, built on a foundation of empathy. On my first day, as I walked up to my new office, I saw a small polished brass plaque on the door. It didn't have my name on it. It simply said, "The Whisper Room." It was a quiet gift from Eli. I stood there for a long moment, a slow, genuine smile, spreading across my face for the first time in what felt like years. My legacy would not be a codename whispered in the shadows of intelligence operations. It would be a classroom, a place to pass on what I had learned, to ensure that no young officer would ever be made to feel that their intellect was a weakness, or that a weapon that didn't fire bullets was useless. In my first class, I didn't begin with grammar or vocabulary. I began with a story. A modified, anonymous version of a mission that nearly failed because of a single, misunderstood cultural gesture. I taught them how to listen, not just to words, but to silences. I taught them how to look into someone's eyes and see the story they weren't telling. After the class, a young female specialist, sharp and bright-eyed, stayed behind. "Captain," she said, her voice filled with a quiet reverence. "Thank you, no one has ever told us that empathy could be a tactic." In that moment, watching the spark of understanding in her eyes, I knew I had found my true purpose. I hadn't just won my own war, I was now arming a new generation of soldiers with the weapons of understanding. Weapons that could build bridges instead of just destroying enemies. My healing process began there, in the quiet woods of Missouri, nurtured by the words of Isaiah my mother used to read to me. "So do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you." A year later, a small package arrived at my office. There was no return address, but I recognized the elegant, looping handwriting of my aunt. Inside, there was no letter, no explanation, just a single, faded photograph. It was me, at 10 years old, sitting on the floor of our old house at Fort Riley, completely absorbed in the French dictionary my mother had given me, my face a mask of pure concentration and joy. I turned the photo over. My aunt had written a short note on the back. "Your father asked me to send this to you. He didn't say anything else, only that this is how he wants to remember you." It wasn't an apology, it wasn't absolution, but it was an acknowledgement, a quiet admission sent through a third party that the little girl with the books had, in her own way, won, that her path, the one he had scorned and ridiculed, had held a strength he never understood. I took a thumbtack and pinned the photograph to the corkboard in my office, right next to the brass plaque that read, "The Whisper Room." The two legacies, side by side. I looked at the face of that little girl, and for the first time, I didn't feel the sting of her loneliness. I felt only pride. I had been healed, not by forgiving them, but by finally, completely, forgiving myself for ever believing that I wasn't worthy. My story found its peaceful ending, not in revenge, but in rediscovering my own worth. But I know my journey isn't unique. So many of us have fought silent battles, feeling unheard or unseen by those who should have cherished us most. I want to ask you, what was the moment you realized you had to choose yourself? What was the first step you took on your own path? Share your story in the comments below. If stories of strength and resilience like mine resonate with you, please subscribe to our channel. Your voice matters, and you are not alone.